Thanks a lot, Gatuku. I'm going to try as quickly as possible to explain the kind of why the Jobtech Alliance has come into existence and a little bit about where it's come from before Gatuku kind of talks about what it is later. Now, just with some kind of definitional points, what is this term that some of you may or may not be familiar with? One of the first things that the Jobtech Alliance working group has been working on over the last 6 months is trying to actually create a language and a taxonomy and a shared understanding of what this thing is that kind of people seem to be talking about. And we kind of ended up with 5 buckets just to try and ground us and understand what it is that we're talking about. And the first of these buckets is platforms for offline work, what some people like the ILO called location-based platforms. These are job or gig matching platforms where the work is intermediated online, but the work is done offline. There's a second bucket around platforms for digitally delivered work. So this is your online freelancing or your micro work. Recognizing that the large part of employment in Africa is self-employment, there's a big bucket around digitized micro enterprises. So this is your e-commerce marketplaces, your business management tools. There's a bucket around skill building or the part of EdTech related to the world of work. And then finally, a bucket around professional identity, rights, and protection. Now, just to call out that we did some mapping recently with Brighter that Katuku is going to talk about later, where he found over 300 startups and job tech solutions on the continent, and there was only one single one in this final bucket. Now, we left it in there because if we look at some more mature job tech ecosystems in Europe, Latin America, North America as well, you start seeing a lot more startups appearing in that kind of final bucket as the ecosystem matures, as they generally tend to build on top of other job tech startups. So this is kind of what we understand to be job tech. Now, you might say, well, Chris, thanks a lot. You've given me a new piece of jargon to add to my vernacular. But what does this all really mean? Like, why are we doing this? Now, just to explain why this new language and why this taxonomy, it's because language is important. When I started my current role at Mexico about a year ago, I was given this mandate to say, like, find out how we can be useful in the kind of tech and employment space. And I spoke to about 100 actors in this field, mostly startups, many of the people in the room here today. And I asked which sector they were a part of. I got about 100 different answers. You know, some people say e-commerce, some people say fintech, some people say edtech. Now, these were all kind of things that people were struggling with, were all related to employment, but without a shared language, taxonomy, and understanding of what the space was, it was really hard to work on how to do anything about the challenges that people were facing. Now, you could also say, well, Chris, you're just trying to force all these different things together to make sense. But one of the other questions I asked was, really, can these different kind of subsectors be part of one space and one ecosystem? And one of the people I spoke to, Paul, who is leading one of the breakouts later, was previously involved in the financial inclusion space. And he explained that what I was referring to in the job tech space was actually very similar to what the fintech space was like about 10 years ago. You used to have lots of different broken ecosystems where you had one around kind of microloans, a separate ecosystem around digital payments, another ecosystem around insurance. Now, what the narrative and language around fintech did was started to widen these spaces out, connecting the dots between different actors, stimulating more collaborations. Investors who used to look at one little space were now looking at a much bigger area. And this is kind of the foundation of a lot of what we're looking at with the Jobtech Alliance, trying to define and create a space which has a shared language, a shared understanding, and trying to build this ecosystem for all of the actors within. Now, we settled on this language within our working group of Jobtech. This was language that lined up with most of the needs and has quite an emerging, and is an emerging term in kind of the global space. We define and understand it as the use of technology to enable, facilitate, or improve the productivity of people to access and deliver quality work. Now, that's kind of like what job tech is, but why? Like, why do we care about it? Why is it something that matters? Now, maybe just to start this off by saying what it isn't. Job tech is not employment, youth employment as a whole. You know, youth employment on the continent is a huge issue that requires kind of work, vocational training on rules and norms. And technology or job tech is just one function within that much bigger system. But we feel it's a function that has huge potential to make a big difference in employment on the continent. And it's also probably underaddressed. There's some real challenges that means that technology is not really yet realizing the opportunity on the continent that it could. And we're going to talk through some of those now, those challenges. The first is that there's really quite little information, knowledge, or sharing between actors in this space that we now call job tech. Partly it's because they were coming from fragmented institutions. But to share some experience that I had, so I was COO of a gig matching platform in Kenya, working with informal workers for 3 years. And when I compared my experience to that of my friends and colleagues in fintech and edtech, they had WhatsApp groups, meetups, conferences, research. There was this wealth of information trying to kind of help build the understanding of what works and what doesn't. That meant that broadly the sector was going in the right direction. In the job tech space, I really had no one that I could speak to or that I could learn from. And I didn't know who they were or how to find them. I also, to give an example of what this kind of looks like in real life, I was lucky to be involved in Village Capital, who are represented here today, their Future of Work Accelerator recently. And I had to review 8 applications. Fully 4 of the 8 applications had the business model of the startup that I worked with. Now, this was a business model that failed for us. Not that failed in 2020. It was a business model that failed for us in 2016 that we very quickly pivoted away from. But it's a sign of a broken ecosystem where you have people making the same mistakes over and over again. And one of the main reasons for the Jobtech Alliance existing here today is to start building out some of that knowledge base so that we see kind of progress within the ecosystem. A second thing to call out about this space is that it's hard. Let's be honest, everyone on this call is working in a really, really difficult space, and there are no easy solutions. Let's be honest, the market fundamentals are difficult. You have an oversupply of what is deemed to be kind of low quality workers and a lack of demand. The job seekers, the people who we're working forward with, don't have a lot of money to pay for services. When most startups on the continent that have thrived and succeeded and scaled generally did so by drastically reducing the cost of something, when the cost of something in a lot of job tech is labor, it's hard not just to push a race to the bottom. Particularly when you're competing with the informal sector, which is often illegally underpaid, and we're trying to bring transparency and formality into this space, it can be really difficult to make viable businesses, which is why real creativity is needed. And this comes in part from learning from the work of others, from collaborating and seeing new opportunities. Thirdly, there's not a lot of funding in the job tech space. I'm sure all startups represented here will be feeling the same pains. There's few investors looking at job tech outside of maybe ride hailing, digitizing micro enterprises, because there's not a lot of proven business models. Even Mercy Corps' own venture capital arm, which has job tech as an investment thesis, has struggled to find investable businesses. And while there's a lot of philanthropic money working for youth employment at large, it often doesn't know how to work with the for-profit startups. And there's a lack of proven blended finance models. Now, just explaining kind of working on each of those 3 issues is really hard to do when there isn't an ecosystem or a community to actually plug into. And that's really the basis of the Jobtech Alliance and kind of the foundation of the why. Now, just to say, there's a lot we can learn from and lot we can look up to from others. In the US, there's a really exciting community emerging around Jobtech, and they call it Jobtech, doing a similar thing to us of trying to build a taxonomy and a community around Jobtech solutions. In Sweden, there's a government department called Jobtech.SV, which is trying to build technology that works with different startups to make sure that their job tech solutions are more impactful and inclusive. In India, we see a few investors that are trying to build whole portfolios around job tech. In Latin America, there's a pretty significant ecosystem building activity around worker tech. And in the UK, the government has tried to push a community building activity around what they call career tech. So there's a lot starting to happen in this space, trying to build communities around job tech across the world. And we hope to do the same for Africa. Now, just to say a couple of points. Firstly, that no single organization can build an ecosystem. This is very obvious, and while we tried to kick some of this stuff off 6 months ago as Mercy Call, we did so very quickly with these 8 different organizations that Katuku talked about earlier. Today, we moved from 8 to 40-ish. Over the coming months and years, hopefully it becomes a few hundred organizations kind of working together towards this shared goal. Now, just to end with a couple of final points. The first one is a quote from one of these working group members, Shami, who sadly couldn't make it today. But she gave this beautiful quote that kind of explained what we're trying to do in this broadly system change activity. She said, what we're really doing when we talk about system change is rewiring the system. What's interesting here is that the cabling has not been laid yet. And I'll just leave you with this last thought about the fact that we really have the chance to be ahead of the curve here and lay the cables in a way that ensures that we can build startups that are viable, successful businesses making an impact at scale. In North America and Europe, job tech just kind of happened. One day to the next, work was Uberized, and it was left to society and regulators to work out what this all meant. Here, where in Africa, where job tech is not yet ubiquitous, we have the chance to lay down some of those cables to make sure that we create strong solutions and large-scale impact. Thanks. That's all from me. Back